The Secret of Mental Magic, A Course of 7 Lessons, 1907, William Walker Atkinson, 1862 through 1932. To my friend, Hellion Williams, whose writings gave me inspiration, courage, determination, and will when I sorely needed them, this little volume is respectfully inscribed. Epigraph. But one day, the sturdy lion, the monarch of the wilds, was grievously wounded by the arrows of the hunters, and crept away to seek rest and shelter. But alas, in its hour of need, it attracted to itself the kicks from the hooves of the wild asses of the desert, and the malicious snaps of the jackals, which formerly partook of the scraps of the feast of the monarch. Such is life, my son. When the mighty are fallen low, then cometh the day of the lesser ones. Ancient Persian Fable. Contents. Lesson 1, Mental Magic. Lesson 2, The Underlying Force. Lesson 3, Mental Suggestion. Lesson 4, Personal Influence. Lesson 5, The Science of Telementation. Lesson 6, Mental Therapeutics. Lesson 7, Mental Architecture. Author's Foreword. In this book, I deliver to you a message that has been seeking expression for some time. It is a strong message of elemental power and primitive force. It is given to you in its original simplicity and is not draped with airy metaphysical veils, nor by heavy theological prejudices or predilections. I have tried to get down to the bare body of the truth concerning mental magic, although in order to do so, I have had to strip away covering after covering of personal views of writers, teachers, schools, and cults. I have cast aside these discarded draperies and now present to you the simple, natural truth as I have found it. Some who are partial to these added draperies may resent their disuse. I can't help it if they do. I am not writing this book for such. Others may be shocked at the nakedness of the unadorned truth. I cannot help this either. This book was not written for mental prudes. So let them stalk off hiding their faces with the hands if they wish. They will sneak a hasty glance over their shoulders, though, when they think that no one is looking. Such people always do. These lessons are solid and contain much strong food for strong people. There is nothing of the Charlotte Bussy or meringue about these lessons. They are solid food and must be partaken of as such. Partaken of properly, they will nourish and strengthen you, building up muscle, tissue, and bone. But, bolted or swallowed at a gulp, they may give you a bad case of mental dyspepsia. Hygienic laws operate on the mental as well as the physical plane. The lessons are full of concentrated, condensed information and must be partaken of in small bites, well masticated, in order to ensure perfect digestion. You must study each lesson before you proceed to the next one. You cannot skim over these lessons in a single reading if you expect to master their contents. They need reading and rereading, and each time you go over them, you will find something new. I have compressed in this book enough matter to fill 6 books, if properly diluted and spread out. The original size of this book was about 200 pages, but after the original manuscript was placed in the hands of the printer, I kept on thinking of this thing and that thing that should go in the book. And so, from day to day, I sent to the printer enough additional matter to bring the book up to its present proportions, about double the original size. The price was kept the same, of course. This additional matter has been inserted and dovetailed in among the original matter, until to the proofreaders the lessons seemed like a mosaic or grandmother's quilt. The advance notices were out, so I could not devote as much time as I would have liked to the work of polishing up the connecting joints or rounding up the corners, occasioned by this insertion of new matter in the different parts of the several lessons. Consequently, there may be apparent a lack of smoothness and finish about the work arising from this cause. I trust that you will understand and pardon such, in view of what I have said to you. But after all, I must confess that I do feel that I have given you good measure, heaped full and running over, and have managed to deliver my message according to my best desire. And that's the principal thing after all, isn't it? To all the students of these lessons, I send a message of good cheer, courage, and self-confidence. You are the centers of power in the great ocean of universal power. Realize this truth, and you will have attained that which you seek. You have attracted this book to you. Now, take what the law has sent you and use it. And as it brought you this, so will it bring you that which you desire so ardently. William Walker Atkinson, Masonic Temple, Chicago, 3rd, February 26th, 1907. My basic statement. There exists an universal dynamic principle of life, pervading all space, immanent in all things, manifesting in an infinite variety of forms and life and energy or force. And the essential inner nature of that universal principle is mind. The energy or force of that principle is no respecter of persons. Its services are open to all, and it operates in response to the proper effort, no matter by whom it may be exerted. But the proper effort must be exerted consciously or unconsciously, else there will be no operation of the forces. William Walker Atkinson. Lesson 1. Mental Magic. By mental magic, I mean all the wonderful instances of the influence of one mind over another, as evidenced in thousands of different forms, degrees, and phases, whether in the form of personal magnetism or the subtle fascinating charm of one mind over another, that form of mental force that influences as if by an irresistible charm that bewitches, allures, charms, enchants, attracts, or in what has been called fascination, in which one person is able to influence another in an uncontrollable manner by exercising a powerful or irresistible influence upon his or her affections, emotions, passions, or thoughts, or in some of the other similar forms of the exercise of an unseen, inexplicable influence upon others, or in the phenomena known as hypnotism, mesmerism, psychologism, etc., with which all are more or less familiar, or in the phenomena attendant upon the revival of the ancient occultism in the last 20 years, under various names and forms, the fundamental principle of which consists in forms of mental treatment of one kind or another, present or absent, or in the phenomena of what has been called suggestion, of which we hear so much in scientific circles, or in the various forms of mind or faith cures, of which so much has been heard of late years, and upon which a number of religions and cults have been built, or in the repulsive forms of mental influence known as witchcraft, voodooism, black magic, etc. We have the same fundamental principle and manifestation of some phase of the general phenomena of mental magic. The same cause in under all its manifestations, good or bad, black or white, in all the operation of the great law or principle of nature. Mysterious mental influencing power. We see on all sides men who seem to exert a wonderful and mysterious mental influence upon others, upon those associated with them, or upon the public mind. Leaders spring into prominence, apparently owing their power to some mysterious influence over the minds and wills of others. Some attain power and position, others attain wealth and social state, by reason of some inner force. When we meet certain people, we become at once impressed by a something about them that makes its power and influence felt by us. They seem to radiate a peculiar force that bends our wills captive and causes us to fall in with their desires, to a greater or lesser extent. We know that when some people enter a room, they bring with them an indefinable influence that becomes apparent to all. Certain houses and stores have atmospheres of their own, which are perceptible to those entering them. Some places are depressing to all who live or do business in them. Some salesmen impart a sense of confidence and trust at once, while others cause the reverse. Some persons attract, others repel. Some people seem to have a way of influencing the minds of others with whom they come in contact, so that these others will rally around the self-constituted leader, and thus cults, religions, and isms are formed. We all know how far a strong magnetic leader may carry his followers. We have seen many instances of it during the past 20 years. People have followed some of these leaders like flock of sheep, and they will always do so until the underlying principle is understood and people protect themselves. And all of these things go to form part of the phenomena of mental magic. Surely the subject is worth investigating. The present interest in mental magic. Now, as never before, the subject of the mystic forces of the mind is attracting the attention of the majority of thinking people. In the ages of the past, the knowledge of the subject was possessed by but the few, who jealously guarded it from the minds of the masses, the latter obtaining but the scraps of the hidden knowledge, and that adulterated with the grossest superstition and attributed to the particular form of primitive religion prevailing in the particular place at that particular time. And even now, notwithstanding the popular interest in the subject, but very few have arrived at a scientific understanding of the matter, and the majority take their knowledge of the new psychology in the capsule of dogma and theory advanced by some particular cult or sect. Mental magic has been known to the race, in one form or another, from time before history was written. In the earliest records, we find many traces of it among all peoples, and even today it is known and practiced, in a more or less ignorant manner, by all races, from the people of the highest civilization known to us, down to the ignorant African savages or bushmen. Many have been turned away from a serious consideration of the subject by the fact that many of its forms have been accompanied by the grossest superstition and the most absurd, repulsive ceremonies. They have failed to see that underlying all the extravagant ideas and methods of application, there was to be found a fundamental law of nature, as real and as constant as any other natural law or force, and inasmuch as this law is in constant operation and all are subject to its influence and effect, does it not become the duty of intelligent people to acquaint themselves with this mighty force or law in order that they may understand its workings, take advantage of its benefits, and protect themselves against its misuse? Believing that there is but one answer to this question, this series of lessons has been written in order to throw light on a subject commonly left in the dark, or at least in the twilight of the human understanding. The basis of modern isms. I am fully aware of the fact that many ingenious theories have been advanced by modern writers attempting to account for the phenomena of mental magic. But all students of the subject are aware that these theories, cleverly as they have been designed, are more or less self-contradictory, and many a reader has thrown aside the subject in disgust after a vain attempt at reconciling the opposing views. And to make the matter worse, various cults and sects and isms have sprung into existence, and promulgators and leaders of which have used the accepted phenomena of mental magic as a foundation upon which to build airy structures of religion, philosophy, and metaphysics. Many of these cults have practically claimed a monopoly of the great natural force and have assumed the right to be the sole custodians of the secrets thereof, alleging that they have the only real article, all others are base imitators. notwithstanding that all of them show that they have arrived at least a working knowledge of the force and are obtaining results, each obtaining about the same percentage of successes, notwithstanding the fact that each denies the other the fact of possessing the information and right to use it. It is not apparent to any intelligent observer that they are all using the same great natural force, in spite of their conflicting theories, and that their results are obtained in spite of their theories, rather than because of them. Mental magic. What is mental magic? Perhaps the best way to begin our consideration of the subject would be for us to take a look at the original definitions of the two words composing the title of these lessons, mental magic. It is always well to turn to the dictionary when you begin the consideration of any subject, for by doing so, you get at the original idea in the minds of the people who first used the terms, and give to your subject thought a firm and solid foundation. You place yourself in the position of the original thinker, and have the advantage that always comes from the possession of a new thought fresh from the mint of the mind, able to see the idea free from the excrescences which afterwards attach to it. The word mental is derived from the Latin word mentis, the mind, and Webster defines the English word as of or pertaining to the mind. The definitions of the word mind are more or less imperfect and unsatisfactory, necessarily so, because men do not know the real nature of mind, and can define it only in the terms of its own states. Perhaps this definition is as clear as any. By mind, we mean simply that by which we perceive, think, feel, desire, and will. So we may consider mental as meaning of or pertaining to that by which we perceive, think, feel, desire, and will. So much for the first word. The Persian magi, the second word, magic, which derived from the Persian word mag, meaning a priest. The Persian priests were wonder workers or magicians, the latter word being derived from the word magi, the name of the hereditary caste of priests of ancient Persia and Media, the magician order or esoteric cult of the Zoroastrian priesthood, represented the center of ancient occultism at that period of the world's history, and their influence was felt in all parts of the world and continues down to this time. So highly were its members respected and considered that the term wise men and magi were synonymous. The three wise men mentioned as appearing at the birth of Christ, Matthew 2, were known as the magi or wise men from the East. From the word magi came the term magic, which Webster has defined as follows: the hidden wisdom supposed to be possessed by the magi, relating to the occult powers of nature, mastery of secret forces in nature, having extraordinary properties, seemingly requiring more than human power, etc. So we may consider the word magic to mean mastery of the occult forces of nature, the term indicating the existence of such forces, and the possibility of the mastery or control of them. The occult forces of nature. But by use of the term mental magic, I mean more than the mere mental control of the occult forces of nature. I mean that these occult forces of nature are themselves mental in character and nature, and that their control or mastery means simply the conscious use, control, mastery, and application of certain mental forces called occult that are possessed by the race and are used by all, either consciously or unconsciously. The mastery or control of these forces means that one may learn to knowingly apply that which all have been using blindly or unknowingly. And as knowledge and intelligent use always means power, the knowledge of the principles of these forces and the consequent intelligent application of them brings power to those acquiring it. The esoteric knowledge. It is true that that which is known as magic has always been mixed up with a mass of credulity, superstition, and meaningless forms and ceremonies. The close student will see that these excrescences and appendages necessarily rose from the superstitions of the mass of the people and to various forms of primitive religions that the race has fostered during the procession of the centuries and ages. The magicians were nearly always priests in the old days, that being the only career open to them, and one that enabled them to erect the barrier of primitive religious rites between their wisdom and the ignorance of the race. The careful student will be able to trace the possession of something real and true, always manifesting among the various forms and ceremonies of the various ancient cults. There is always to be found an esoteric or inner cult within the mass of exoteric or ignorant priesthood and followers of the temples. There was always the light of truth burning in the Holy of Holies of the temples for those who were sufficiently advanced to worship at its shrine. The ancient use of willpower. And among the dim records of the ancient mysteries that have come down to us from ancient India, Egypt, Persia, Chaldea, Babylon, Greece, and Rome, and the other old centers of civilization and culture, we may always find the underlying principle of the existence of some mighty force connected with the human mind, or more particularly, the will, that was at the bottom of the mysteries and magic and miracles. Back of all the ceremonies, rites, and incantations was the esoteric idea that the will was the real force employed under the mask of incantation and rites assumed to impress the imaginations and minds of the populace. Back of the amulet and charm was the working of the will of the person wearing them, which was called into effect by the faith or imagination, a real power and not a fancy as many believe, of the man ignorant of the real force. As the writer on the subject in the Encyclopedia Britannica has truly said, although he was ignorant of the truth underlying the silly forms, there being an evident relation between an object and the thought of it, it becomes one of the chief practices of the sorcerer to try to make things happen by thinking about them. And the same writer in another place speaks of the element in magic not depending upon spirits, depends upon imagined powers and correspondences in nature, of which the adepts avail themselves in order to discover hidden knowledge and to act upon the world around them by means beyond the ordinary capabilities of men, thus by mere effort of will, etc., etc. And the student who will look under the surface and read between the lines will be able to see the evidence of mental magic, underlying all forms of magic, mystery, and wonder-working miracles of all times and ages and people, of all kinds, character, or name. Behind all the masks, he will see the features of this use of the will force of man, always the same, in spite of the fantastic and grotesque masks and trappings. The priestly adepts. I could fill pages with recitals of the many disguises under which mental magic masquerades. But I must hurry on the telling how, and I can do no more than to hastily call your attention to the many evidences of the use of this power in all parts of the world and in all times. The ancient mysteries of Egypt, Greece, etc., were systems of forms and ceremonies wherein were hidden the use of mental magic. The sick were brought to the temples and healed. The minds of the populace were filled with the thoughts of victory impressed upon them by the will and subtle suggestions of the priests. What we now know in these days as will force and mental suggestion, including that which we now call affirmations or autosuggestions, were understood and skillfully used by the priests or magicians in order to control the people. And it must not be for a moment supposed that these forces were used for evil purposes. On the contrary, the priests were the real governing classes, the powers behind the throne, and they felt the responsibility of power and endeavored by their knowledge of the occult forces of the mind to lead the people in the right path. Of course, selfish men, there have always been, and we hear of cases away back in the early days of history where this power was prostituted for evil and selfish purposes, just as power is always capable of wrong application. In all ages, we learn of the healing of the sick by mental power, for mental healing presents an unbroken line from the earliest days down to the present, concealed often under fancy trappings, but the same in principle always. And what we call mental suggestion has always been in force in the hands of the leaders of the race to influence, for good or evil, those under them. The great leaders of men have always been adepts in mental magic, although many of them have never suspected the sources of their power. The force above good and evil. To many, it may seem almost sacrilegious to state that the highest uses of mental magic, such as leading the race up to the higher ideals, aims, and accomplishments to success, happiness, and health, are merely higher forms of the same force that is used by the ignorant and repulsive savage in his rites of voodooism, sorcery, and similar dark practices. But it is true. Mental magic is like any other great natural force. It is above good and evil. It is neither good and evil, but may be used for either. This is true of electricity, steam, explosives, and every other natural force, and we might as well look at this fact squarely in the face and govern ourselves accordingly. The same force that is used by the modern healer when he or she treats a patient for health, success, or some other desirable quality is the same used by the Black Voodoo, the Congo sorcerer, the Salem witch, the Hawaiian conjure man who prays people into sickness and death, the medicine man of the American Indian with his charms and incantations, the wizards and enchanters of the Middle Ages, the practitioner of adverse treatments or malicious mental magnetism of the modern cults. The same force pervades all, just as the same lifeblood runs through the saint and sinner, the angel and demon, the dove and the serpent, the lamb and the tiger, nature's one force through all. The secret of the force, and just as the mental magic brought into operation through the prayers of the faithful of all religions, before their shrines, images, and holy objects, so may the same force be brought into operation through the fetishes, conjurations, enchantments, charms, spells, and devil worships of the ignorant and depraved minds. The secret is this: the power does not come from the supposed source, but from within the mind of the man employing it, and still more startling to the uninitiated in this statement, which is equally true. The power of the mind of the person affected is the real cause of the effect, rather than the power of the mind of the supposed causer, the latter merely calling into operation the power of the mind of the person affected. Ignorant use of the force. Passing from the past to the present age, we see in greater use than ever this wonderful mental magic. No longer the property of the few. The information has filtered out among the masses through various sources, and we see the force in use on all sides. Often the persons using it have not the true knowledge of its real nature, and such persons often involved themselves in a terrible whirlpool of effects by reason of a selfish and base employment of this power. Many are playing with this force like children playing with dynamite. It is one of the purposes of the lessons to call the attention of such people to the nature of the force they are employing, and the possible, nay, probable results of a misuse of it. Not that they are punished for such misuse, but rather by reason of it. Black magicians are invariably caught in the meshes of their own nets, are entangled in the psychic machinery of their own manufacture, and are blown up by their own psychic high explosives. These things will be dealt with in their proper places in these lessons. Modern uses of the force. In concluding this little consideration of the subject, I would call to the attention of the student to the fact that now, for the first time in the history of the world, mental magic is being employed for further commercial aims and ends. Testaments for wealth are commonly known and advertised. Instructions in the use of suggestions for commercial purposes are furnished both personally and in correspondence courses. The laws and principles are explained, partially at least, in books written for the instruction of those selling or advertising goods, and otherwise soliciting and patronage of the public. It is true that the few strong men in business life have always made use of this force, consciously or unconsciously, but never before has it been taught generally as a part of a business education. It has been reserved for America to recognize the force and to boldly apply it in this way, i.e., to the making of dollars. In other countries are fast falling in line, and in view of this fact, it is not time that those who know of the real nature, principles, and laws of this force should give to the world their knowledge, that the race may know with what they are dealing, and may be enabled to extract the good from it by proper use, and seeing the evil possibilities of improper use, may avoid such prostitution of one of nature's greatest forces. The attempt to monopolize the occult knowledge. Many students of the occult have sought to keep from the general public a knowledge of the fundamental principles of the great law of nature underlying the phenomena of mental magic. They have claimed that it was dangerous for people generally to know that such a force existed and could be used. They have held that such knowledge should be carefully guarded by the few, and that its very existence should be denied to the many. This may have been good reasoning in the earlier days of the world, when the masses were grossly ignorant, and when the only knowledge was locked up in the minds of the case of the priests and other leaders of the race. But the argument no longer applies, for the general intelligence of the race has refused to allow any locked doors in the temple of knowledge, and has insisted that all doors be thrown open to them. The result has been that a considerable body of occult knowledge has been opened to the gaze of the public, and they are clamoring for more. Much of the knowledge possessed by the public regarding mental magic is but quasi-knowledge, half-truths, and the time has come when the whole truth should be taught. Too late to deny facts. The time has arrived when the public should be made acquainted with the great force underlying the phenomena of mental magic. People should be instructed regarding this force, its laws and operation, its intelligent and proper use, with directions designed to protect people against its improper use, against them, on the part of others. This latter, a most important matter in these days of occult and psychic investigation on the part of the public and the attempted base and selfish uses to which some are putting the occult mental forces of nature. It is too late to deny or ignore the existence of the mighty mental force in nature that underlies the various forms of phenomena that go to and form the outward face of mental magic, good and bad. Too much has been witnessed by the public concerning these matters for them to be hushed by the old cry, "There's nothing in it but imagination." On the one hand, they have witnessed the various treatments of the healers, tending toward the cure of disease, the attainment of success, etc., and on the other hand, they have heard the whispers of adverse treatments, etc., and have heard of or read the various courses of instruction in hypnotism, mesmerism, etc., etc., and have seen evidences of the good and bad effects of what has been called suggestion in all its forms. And they are beginning to realize that all of these things, differing as they may seem, have a common root in some one natural force. And they are demanding, like the man from Missouri, to be shown, and they have the right to demand this. A mighty power for good or evil. The race has always recognized the existence of a mighty force of nature, which man has employed, consciously or unconsciously, in the direction of influencing his fellow men, other forms of life, and even the so-called lifeless things around him. In the earlier days, this use of the force was called magic, black and white, mystical art, divine power, miracle, fascination, charming, enchantment, wonder-working, necromancy, etc. And in its more base and evil uses, black art, witchcraft, sorcery, voodooism, hexism, etc. For it must be remembered that this great force of nature is capable of base as well as of noble use. Like any other great natural force, like electricity, the power of explosives, steam, the X-rays, radium, etc. This great force is capable of the highest and most beneficial uses by man when properly applied, and is also capable of being applied to the most harmful purposes. Different as are the results arising from the varying applications, the force is the same in each case. The forces of nature are not possessed of a sense of good and evil. Their function and purpose is to act in obedience to the laws of their nature without regard to the question of good and evil, to those by whom or against whom they are employed. This may seem like a terrible thing, but a moment's thought will satisfy you that it is true of all natural forces, and the question of good and evil and its reward or punishment belongs to another plane of life. Ignorance, no protection. But it may be asked, why do I wish to inform the public about a force, unknown to many, which is capable of evil, as well as of good use and results? The answer is simple. Ignorance is no protection against anything, for the knowledge is always possessed of the few who may use it on the ignorant many without suspicion. The greater publicity is given to a thing, the better it is understood, the better may its good effects be obtained, and the less the danger of its improper use. Forewarned is forearmed. If a thing is good, the greater publicity given it, the greater the good. If it is evil, the brighter the searchlight turned upon it, the less danger is there attendant upon it. The danger of all evils lies in the darkness of concealment, not the daylight of publicity. Turn on the light has always been the watchword of progress and civilization. And more particularly is this so at this, the first decade of the 20th century, when the interest in occultism and kindred subjects has made a number of people acquainted with the force known as mental magnetism, and has acquainted them with its uses under various names and theories. And in many cases, it is being practiced upon people who are unfamiliar with the subject. And therefore, it is time that someone should turn on the light, that it may be seen by all men and known for what it is, capable of the highest and the lowest uses, but a great force of nature. The bane and the antidote. And with this exposition of it, goes the remedy and protection against improper use, as well as the knowledge of its wonderful proper uses. If it be a bane, here is the antidote. But it is not necessarily a bane, any more than steam, electricity, and explosives are a bane to mankind. What would be thought of people who would suppress knowledge of all natural laws because of the possibility of improper use? Ignorance is no protection. Truth, in fact, must be followed to the end, and it will be discovered that in nature, every force that may be possible of hurtful use may be guarded against by natural means. The coming of the Superman. So much for the unpleasant side, but there is a very pleasant side to the subject of mental magic. This force has come to man just when he most needs it. he has used the so-called mechanical forces to clear away the obstacles that nature put into his way in order to develop him into a man. And now he turns to higher forms of energy and work. He is crying for new worlds to conquer. And these new worlds will be conquered by the mind, rather than by the muscle. Greater things are before the race, and one of the greatest forces in nature is the work of the building up of the Superman. Will be the force called mental magic. By it, man will be enabled to fight off the forces of ignorance and materialism and to draw to himself knowledge from the universal mind that will enable him to accomplish the heretofore impossible. A scientific presentation. In these lessons, I shall treat mental magic as I would any other great force of energy in nature, i.e., in a scientific manner, starting the principles plainly and without concealment, and also giving in full what I and other experimenters along the lines of this subject have learned of the methods beneficial and the reverse concerning the application of these principles. In the case of the beneficial application, full directions will be given that the student may avail himself of the force to the fullest extent. In the cases where the subject of the harmful use of the force is alluded to, the student will be instructed how the same may be prevented, obviated, and neutralized so that full protection is assured. This is what I should do in lessons upon electricity, steam, or explosives. And that is the course I purpose following in these lessons on mental magic. Adverse criticism braved. It is possible that this course may bring upon me the adverse criticism of those who believe that the public is not ready for such knowledge, and that such things should be reversed for the few. To such people and all others, I would say that I have no sympathy with such an attitude, and I believe that the race is ready for all truth, and that that which is proper for the few is proper for the many. I believe that the greater the degree of knowledge, the greater the degree of power and advancement. I believe that ignorance is not happiness, and that to keep a man ignorant of a natural fact, in order that he may escape its effects, is like allowing him to smoke when seated on a keg of powder, rather than to acquaint him with a knowledge of explosives, or, to use another figure, to advise him to bury his head in the sand like an ostrich, rather than to look upon the approach of a possible danger. I do not believe in such sophistry. I do not believe in ignorance. I do not believe in darkness. Therefore, I purpose to turn on the light.